The sound of heavy rain pounded against the grand windows of the Ivanov estate. The night was cold, unforgiving, just like the man standing at the altar. Dimitri Ivanov, Russia's most feared mafia boss, adjusted the cuffs of his black suit with an expression of pure indifference. His sharp blue eyes scanned the guests, a mixture of powerful men and trembling outsiders who wouldn't dare meet his gaze. This wasn't a wedding of love. It was a transaction, a punishment. At the end of the long aisle, Alina Morozov stood frozen, her delicate fingers clutching the white lace of her gown. She wasn't meant to be here. She wasn't meant to be his wife. Yet here she was, about to be bound to a man whispered about in fearful tones across Russia. The reason? Revenge. Her brother Victor had made a fatal mistake, one that cost Dimitri dearly. And now Dimitri would take something just as precious from Victor. His sister. Alina swallowed hard as the priest began to speak. She had no choice. If she refused, her family would suffer. If she ran, there would be nowhere to hide. So with a slow, measured breath, she met Dimitri's gaze and whispered the words that sealed her fate. "I do." The applause was hollow. The kiss, a mere brush of lips, devoid of warmth. The guests raised their glasses in forced celebration, but everyone knew the truth. This was not a love story. This was a war. The reception was a grand yet suffocating affair. Chandeliers bathed the hall in golden light, and waiters weaved between powerful men in tailored suits, their hushed conversations tinged with both admiration and fear of the man of the hour, Dimitri Ivanov. Alina sat beside her new husband, her back stiff, her fingers gripping the stem of a wine glass she had yet to drink from. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, watching, waiting, judging. Dimitri, on the other hand, was the picture of ease. He leaned back in his chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, exuding the silent confidence of a man who always had the upper hand. "You haven't touched your wine." His voice was deep, smooth, yet laced with an unspoken warning. Alina forced herself to meet his gaze. "I don't like drinking in unfamiliar company." A smirk ghosted his lips. "A wise habit." He swirled the whiskey in his glass before taking a slow sip. "Not that it will matter soon. You are my wife now. You should get used to unfamiliar company." The way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. She set her glass down and straightened her shoulders. "Let's not pretend this is something it's not." Her voice was low, controlled. "You did not marry me for love. You married me for revenge." Dimitri's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. He tilted his head slightly, watching her with quiet amusement. "And yet, here you are." Alina clenched her jaw. Of course she was here, because there was no other choice. Dimitri leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your brother cost me something valuable, and I believe in balance, Alina." He let the name roll off his tongue, slowly, deliberately. "He took from me. Now I take from him." Alina's fingers curled into fists beneath the table, hidden by the delicate fabric of her dress. She wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything but sit here as if she were just another piece in his grand game of power. "Balance," she echoed, her voice steady, despite the storm raging inside her. "Is that what you call this?" His smirk returned, cruel and knowing. "You'll learn, Princessa. In my world, debts are always paid." A cold silence stretched between them. The celebration continued around them, oblivious to the war brewing at the head table. Then, in a single smooth movement, Dimitri stood and extended a hand to her. "It's time we leave." Alina hesitated. The wedding night. The moment where she would officially become his in every sense of the word. But Dimitri Ivanov did not wait for hesitations. His fingers closed around hers in a firm grip, and she had no choice but to rise and follow. As they stepped into the waiting black car, the realization settled deep in her bones. She was now the wife of a monster. But the monster had no idea she was about to become his worst nightmare. The ride to Dimitri's estate was silent, filled only with the low hum of the car's engine. Alina sat rigidly beside her new husband, her mind racing. She had to be careful. Every move counted. Dimitri, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. One hand rested on the steering wheel, the other holding a cigarette between his fingers. The dim glow of the city lights flickered against his sharp features, making him look even more untouchable. "You're quiet," he remarked, exhaling smoke. "Regretting your vows already?" Alina turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I regret a lot of things." He chuckled, a low, dark sound. "Honesty. I like that." They arrived at the Ivanov estate, a massive, fortress-like mansion that loomed in the night. Armed guards stood at the entrance, nodding respectfully as Dimitri led Alina inside. The grand interior was cold, impersonal, just like the man who owned it. Dark marble floors, towering glass windows, and a roaring fireplace in the center of the vast living room. It was luxurious, yet lifeless. Dimitri removed his suit jacket and tossed it onto the couch before turning to her. "Our room is upstairs. Follow me." Our room. Alina's pulse quickened, but she schooled her expression and followed him up the wide staircase. The master bedroom was just as imposing as the rest of the house. A large bed, black silk sheets, and a single window overlooking the estate grounds. Dimitri leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "Relax, princessa. I won't touch you unless you ask me to." His smirk was teasing, but his gaze was sharp, reading her every reaction. Alina lifted her chin. "You think I'd ever ask that of you?" His smirk widened. "I think you'll surprise yourself." She refused to let him see the effect his words had on her. Instead, she stepped further into the room and turned her back to him. If everything went according to plan, he wouldn't have the chance to test that theory. "Good night, Dimitri," she said flatly. He chuckled again. "Good night, Mrs. Ivanov." Then, to her surprise, he left, closing the door behind him. Alina exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. This was it, her only chance. She walked to the vanity, where a small glass bottle was hidden beneath her jewelry case. A powerful sedative, strong enough to put Dimitri Ivanov to sleep, long enough for her to disappear. Carefully, she made her way downstairs. The guards were still at their posts, but they were used to Dimitri's women wandering through the house. They wouldn't suspect anything yet. Dimitri was in the study, pouring himself a drink. He raised an eyebrow as she entered. "Changed your mind already?" She forced a small smile. "I figured we should share a drink, a toast, to new beginnings." Dimitri studied her for a long moment before nodding. "All right, princessa, let's drink." Alina poured the whiskey, her hand steady as she slipped the sedative into his glass. She handed it to him, watching as he lifted it to his lips. And then, he hesitated. His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. "Tell me, Alina." He swirled the drink in his hand, his voice dangerously soft. "How does it feel to lie to a monster?" Her blood ran cold. He knew. Alina's heart slammed against her chest. She stood frozen, her fingers still gripping the glass. Her mind raced. Had he figured it out? Could he possibly know what she had planned? Dimitri's gaze never left hers. His expression remained calm, almost too calm, as if he were waiting for her to make the next move. "Why do you hesitate?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "You wanted me to drink this, didn't you?" Alina forced herself to meet his eyes. "No." He couldn't know. "I just wanted to make sure it was the right drink," she said, forcing a smile. "After all, it's not every day a woman marries a mafia boss." Dimitri's lips curled into a tight smile. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "You're a clever girl, Alina, but I'm not the fool you think I am." For a moment, she felt the air between them grow heavy with tension. Her pulse hammered in her ears. How did he know? "Drink your whiskey, Dimitri," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's just a toast, to us." But Dimitri didn't reach for his glass. Instead, he stood up, taking slow, deliberate steps toward her. "You think I'm just a monster, don't you?" His voice was thick with something darker, something deeper. You think this marriage is all about revenge. You think I'm some kind of brute who doesn't know what's going on around him. Alina's stomach twisted. Was this a game? Was he playing with her? Then let me tell you something, Alina, he continued, his voice suddenly cold, unforgiving. I've known who you are from the very beginning. Her breath caught in her throat. What are you talking about? Dimitri stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You think you're the only one with a plan? You think you're the only one who can play games? He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small envelope. He slid it across the table to her and she hesitated before taking it. Inside was a single photograph, Alina's brother Victor. But there was something different about this photo. The image showed him not as the man she knew, but as a younger version, standing beside a group of men. One of those men was Dimitri Ivanov. Alina's breath caught. This is from years ago. Yes, Dimitri replied, his voice steady. Victor was involved in something far worse than you ever knew. He's been a part of the very reason I've been coming after your family. Alina's mind raced. But you said... I said I was marrying you for revenge, he interrupted. But you've been playing your own game, haven't you? You thought you were using me to settle a score, but you were wrong. I've known everything about your family long before you walked into my life. Alina's world tilted. Her mind struggled to grasp the revelation. You knew? Dimitri leaned in, his voice barely a whisper now. I've known that your brother betrayed me a long time ago. He helped orchestrate the downfall of my empire, Alina. And when he fled, he disappeared into the shadows. But his sister? I've been watching you since the moment we met. You're not the innocent woman you pretend to be. Your loyalty was never with your family. It was with me. She felt the weight of his words crush her. Every move she'd made, every carefully calculated decision to stay close to him, had been a part of his plan. He hadn't been the only one with a secret. Dimitri stepped back, his cold eyes scanning her. And now you're trapped in your own game, Alina. Alina's mind was spinning. Her plan, the one she had been working on for months, was falling apart. She had thought she could outsmart him, that she could escape. But he had known everything. You think I'd let you poison me just like that? Dimitri asked, his voice dark with amusement. You're not the only one who's good at reading people. He tossed the glass aside and took another step toward her. Now let me show you how this really ends, Alina. With a sudden, brutal movement, Dimitri grabbed her wrist, his grip unyielding. The power in his touch sent a shock of fear through her. You were always just a pawn in my game, he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. But don't worry. I'll make sure the ending is something you'll never forget. Alina's heart raced, the thrill of fear and adrenaline flooding her veins. She had underestimated him, but now she realized they were both players in a much larger game, one neither of them could escape. The tension in the room was unbearable. Dimitri's grip on Alina's wrist was like iron, his fingers pressing so hard that she could feel the bruises already forming beneath the fabric of her sleeve. His eyes, cold as steel, locked onto hers, searching for any sign of weakness, any trace of a lie. Do you know why I'm still standing here, Alina? Dimitri's voice was low, almost mocking. Because unlike your brother, I don't run from my problems. I face them head on. She tried to pull away, but his hand tightened. Her pulse raced, not just from fear, but from the crushing realization of how much she had underestimated him. Everything had changed. But then, a flicker of something different crossed his face. His gaze softened, just for a moment. Alina didn't trust it. She couldn't. This was still the man who had destroyed lives. Let go of me, Dimitri, she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. You've already won. Why continue this charade? He studied her for a long time, his grip on her wrist loosening just enough for her to feel a glimmer of hope. You think I want to break you? No, Alina. I want you to understand something. She held her breath. "I didn't marry you just for revenge," he continued, his voice now quieter, almost regretful. "That was part of it. But you, Alina, you're different from the women I've known. You're not just a pawn to me." He paused, a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. "You've always been more than that." Alina's heart skipped a beat. What was he saying? "You're playing your own game too, aren't you?" Dimitri took a step back, his hand now resting at his side. "You didn't just want revenge on your family, you wanted to escape, to control your fate, and you thought you could do it by using me." Her breath hitched. Was he right? Was she just as much a player in this twisted dance as he was? "No, Dimitri," she said, her voice shaking. "You think you know everything about me, but you don't. I wasn't trying to escape. I was trying to protect my family, and in the process I lost myself." Dimitri's eyes softened, but only for a moment. Then just as quickly, the mask of the ruthless Mafia boss returned. "You're still here, Alina. You're still standing. And so am I. So tell me, who won?" The words hung in the air. Who had won? Was this truly a game, or was it something far darker? Two people caught in a web of lies and manipulation, both fighting for control in a world that had no place for them. Alina finally wrenched her wrist free from his grip, her eyes blazing with defiance. "We're both trapped in this game, Dimitri, but I will find a way out. I always do." Dimitri stepped closer again, this time with a quiet intensity that made her heart race. "I don't want to control you, Alina," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted that. But I won't let you run from this. From me." Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she saw a glimpse of something more, something human in him. It scared her. It made her feel more vulnerable than she'd ever been before. "I'm not your enemy, Dimitri," she whispered, her words full of quiet truth. "And you're not mine." He looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. The storm inside him seemed to calm, the brutal edge to his demeanor fading just slightly. "You were never my enemy, Alina," he said softly, his gaze searching hers. "But you were always the one I never expected." The silence that followed felt endless, the weight of their shared past hanging heavily between them. Then, slowly, Dimitri reached up and brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, an unexpected gesture of tenderness. "I don't know what this is between us," he said quietly, "but I won't force you. If you want to leave, you can, but know this, Alina." He paused, his gaze intense. "I will always come after you." She swallowed, fighting the urge to flee. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't certain whether she wanted to run from him or toward him. "Maybe you don't have to chase me, Dimitri," she said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Maybe we can both stop running." His eyes darkened, and for a moment Alina thought he might lash out, that old coldness returning. But instead he sighed, his shoulders slumping just slightly. "You're right," he said, his voice quieter. "Maybe I don't have to chase you, but I won't let go of you either." Alina's heart pounded as she watched him, torn between the urge to escape and the strange, undeniable pull between them. Dimitri Ivanov was no simple villain. He was complex, broken in ways she couldn't begin to understand. And she? She was no innocent, no damsel in distress. She had her own darkness, her own secrets. "I don't know what comes next," she said softly. "But I do know one thing." Dimitri raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I'm done running. From you, from my family, everything." She took a step toward him, feeling the dangerous heat between them. "Let's see where this goes. Together. No more lies." For a moment, Dimitri didn't move. Then, slowly, he extended his hand to her. It was a gesture of truce, or maybe something more. But in that fleeting moment, Alina realized that the war between them had ended. The game was over. What came next? She didn't know. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. As she took his hand, she felt the weight of their shared past settle between them, but also a spark of something new, something terrifying and thrilling in its own right. And maybe, just maybe, it would lead to something neither of them had expected.